And I'm joined live from rugby in England by Professor Tim Wilson, who's a political analyst. Tim, thank you so much for joining us here today at short notice on E! News. Just yesterday, Liz Truss told us that she was a fighter and not a quitter. And then 1.5 hours ago, we know how quickly those words got old. Well, what is your reaction? Is it one of surprise, or is this just the next step along the road for the UK?
Well, I think, first of all, her departure has been an inevitability for some weeks. And she really has been her own worst enemy from that point of view. As for the quotation about her being a fighter, not a quitter, you know, she stole that quotation from a member of the opposition, from Mandelson. So it just beggars all belief that she can't find a quotation from Mrs. Thatcher or somebody on her own side. She had to steal it from somebody else. Her tenure, her period of office, she will be, I think, one of the shortest prime ministers, the shortest prime minister in ever.
Yes.
And she will, her chancellor probably will be almost the same. Mr. Hunt will be much the same, as indeed will Kwasi Kwarteng. You know, there's a number of records being broken here. Suella Braverman is the shortest lived Home Secretary. And but all of these people really have been disasters. And Mr. Hunt fouled up the National Health Service when he was in charge of that. He didn't prepare us for COVID, and now he was presented as a solution. You know, it's a series of lame ducks. It's like seeing a farmyard paraded, and all of them squawking. Ben Wallace and Mr. Hunt have both apparently ruled themselves out of the leadership election. They did this a few days ago, so I don't expect them to be competing to replace Liz Truss. It's a poison chalice anyway. And Suella Braverman, this very, very strange Home Secretary, who was even more aggressively anti-immigrant, if that were possible, than her predecessor, Priti Patel. She resigned yesterday over what seems a technicality. Now, maybe she was resigning so she could place herself as a potential successor to Liz Truss. Maybe she really had fouled up. We don't know the details of which documents she circulated on her own personal email. And when a question was asked in the House of Commons today about that, it was met with a bluff and evasion. So we don't know whether she could be in the running. I trust she's not. Therese Coffey, she was caught up in the most extraordinary fracas yesterday evening over fracking, and in the manifesto. The manifesto all those years back in 2019, when Boris was elected with a serious majority, the manifesto said that the Conservatives would not reintroduce fracking, and yet Liz Truss made fracking what at one point was described as a confidence motion. There was a motion put forward by the Labour Party to stop fracking ever again, and the Conservatives were whipped to ensure that motion was defeated. And there was ambiguity, there was uncertainty, and the two whips on the Conservative side, that was Wendy Morton and Craig Whitaker, seemed to have got caught up in some sort of fisticuffs and allegations that they were bullying the members to in which way they should vote. We know that at least 40 people did not vote at all, and some of those were the grandees of the Conservative Party, like the former Prime Minister, Mrs. May. So Therese Coffey was caught up in the middle of that, as was Rees-Mogg, and that was a spectacle which was roundly condemned by the parliamentary observers, by journalists. by the other parties. So I think Therese Coffey and Jacob Rees-Mogg are absolutely out of any sort of race. That leaves really Penny Mordaunt, who was clearly trying again to position herself as somebody that people would remember by taking over from Liz Truss the other day to answer an urgent question which was clearly intended for Liz Truss. And she got into some difficulty saying that Liz Truss was otherwise engaged, and she was answering a question where the Labour Party had rather naughtily suggested that Liz Truss was hiding under her desk. And Penny Mordaunt made that joke linger in what frankly was quite an unprofessional way. That was pretty vicious, and the House howled with laughter, as it was intended to do, and Penny Mordaunt milked that laughter and then got on with the job. So in one sense it was quite an efficient piece of parliamentary theatre. In another sense it was vicious. That really leaves Rishi Sunak, and Rishi Sunak is the favourite to succeed Liz Truss.
I see some latest numbers showing 36% polling for him today.
Yes. Now, Graham Brady has confused the issue by saying that the membership, the broad Conservative Party membership, will be involved in some way. This vote will take place on Friday. How the membership is going to be involved, who knows? There's a lot of discussion about whether or not this is particularly democratic, to have the next Prime Minister chosen by the same people who chose Liz Truss, by the same people who have made one disaster. Are they going to create another disaster? And how will the Home membership be involved if they've only got one day on which to vote? It seems uncertain. I suspect Graham Brady is crossing his fingers that there will be an acclamation for someone like Rishi Sunak. There are some outliers. There's a person who I think it would be worth watching, who at the moment has brought the Northern Ireland problem as close to resolution as I think it would be possible to bring, and that's Chris Heaton-Harris. He's a very calm man, and he used to be the chief whip. Liz Truss demoted him from being chief whip and pushed him over to the Northern Ireland office, but he's managed superbly in a very short space of time to bring that situation almost to resolution. But there's a time break on that. If it isn't solved by the 28th of October, Chris Heaton-Harris has to call an election in Northern Ireland for the Stormont Assembly. Now, I think anybody who can actually get the Irish problem to come somewhere near a resolution, and he was also the chairman of the ERG, could command authority and could provide stability at this time of crisis. I wouldn't be surprised if his name came up. I would be surprised if he accepted the offer, because I think he has more sense than to do that. But I think the likely scenario is that Rishi Sunak will become the next Prime Minister.
Well, the one name you haven't mentioned is the one that's hiding in the wings that's kind of crept off 6 weeks ago, is Boris Johnson. And there are some rumours that he may take this opportunity to try and get his toe back in the door.
Yes, as you noticed, I smile broadly when you mention his name. Well, those rumours are stage managed by Nadine Dorries. This is the lady who was the Minister for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and she hardly managed that ministry with any ability. But what she did manage while she was minister was to be a permanent cheerleader for Boris, rah-rah Boris. And she has, again, she has stage managed what looks like a possible return. I don't see that it is credible. He is facing a serious question from a committee in the House of Parliament, which is going to judge whether or not he lied to the House of Commons. And lying to the House of Commons is the most awful sin. That's something that I think, if one is accused of that and found guilty, one cannot recover in the House of Commons. And it's not the question that he would like. The big debate as we moved into the summer recess is: was he intentionally lying, or was it an accidental deceit? So in other words, almost conceding that he was indeed not telling the truth. What was he doing it knowingly? And at the point when he discovered that parties were happening against the rules, of which he had attended a few, and for which he was fined, did he come back to the House and explain that, in fact, he had misunderstood and correct his error? No, he didn't correct the error at any point. Therefore, he is open to a very serious possibility, and the committee wants to look at whether he lied rather than whether he intentionally lied or accidentally lied.
I think our American brethren refer to those as alternative facts, don't they?
Yes, alternative facts and a trouble with the truth.
Right. Well,
but the thing with Boris is, we knew at the point when he became prime minister that he had a very weak relationship with veracity, and we knew this. So the fact that there is a problem should not be a surprise to anybody. And what I couldn't understand, and what I still can't understand, is why there weren't advisors around him to protect him from himself. Right. And Liz Truss equally didn't seem to have these advisors, because, again, anybody who'd been watching Liz Truss as Foreign Secretary would have known that she was inept and inarticulate, and her knowledge of geography was fairly limited. You remember her inability to face off with Lavrov, playing chicken when she didn't know that Rostov-on-Don was actually a Russian city. Right. This is Pura stuff.
Although we understand earlier this week she wasn't actually hiding under the desk, but she was out doing business. What you just mentioned, I dug out. It seems like it should be a lifetime ago when Boris Johnson resigned, and we had the we had that election process. We should remember that's 3 chancellors ago that all began. But there was a opinion poll I just dug out from the 25th of July, comparing. This was in the last round runoff between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. And in terms of competence, the poll suggested, from 1,000 people in the UK, the poll suggested 29% found Liz Truss competent, 48% found Rishi Sunak doing better with competence. And trust to handle the economy. These are the 2 issues that I think are particularly important for today. Trust to handle the economy. Liz Truss 25%, Rishi Sunak 48%. So it does rather seem as though the choice of Premier in the summer should have taken more heed of a poll like that.
Absolutely. And Liz Truss has crashed our economy. And for what? For an ideological nonsense. At the point when she was elected, she stood in front of Downing. She stood on the platform. I can't remember where it was, with a blue background, and she said she was going to deliver. This struck me as a sort of tricolon that didn't mean very much. Right. All she has delivered is chaos. She then went on in the only speech that she will ever give to the party conference to talk about growth. Again, her rhetorical flourishes don't seem to advance very much. And what growth has she given us? Growth in anxiety, growth in mortgages, growth in tax. I don't think this was the growth she was intending, and either she is responsible for one magnificent accident, or she is utterly inept. I think if I were in her constituency, I would want her not only to resign as Prime Minister, but to resign her seat as well. Right. I certainly wouldn't trust her as an MP, and I certainly wouldn't trust Kwasi Kwarteng. I would want both of them out of Parliament.
Well, we'll see what happens on those fronts. Now, coming back to the selection of the new minister, everybody is now should be versed with what happens in the Conservative Party leadership election, as we've just had one. Short of them producing some new telephone app to choose the leader, If there were, for example, they were able to manage the discussions within the parliamentary membership over the next week and just come up with one with one possibility for leader, would that enable the leadership election to be avoided and for that person to be automatically appointed as Prime Minister? Or is it inevitable that they go through the sort of rounds that we saw during August, July and August?
No. This is exactly the point, and you put your finger exactly on the issue. So if you go back a little bit before the last leadership election to the previous one between Andrea Leadsom and Theresa May, Andrea Leadsom, of course, dropped out just before the membership election cut in, and she dropped out because she'd said some foolish things about being a mother, and this meant that Theresa May was effectively acclaimed. The membership had no need to have any say, and I'm sure that would be Graham Brady's ambition, the chairman of the 1922 committee. I'm sure his ambition is that whoever becomes the next leader of the Conservative Party will be acclaimed by the membership of the parliamentary party, which of course in a sense is the much more democratic way, because these people have actually been elected. The wider membership of the parliamentary party, these are people who paid £25 to become members of the party, and some of them some of them may not even be resident in the UK. We don't really know who they are, and there is no clarity about how big that membership is and where they are. So we don't know who is voting if it goes to the membership again.
Very interesting. So that's something, the details from the 1922 committee are still coming out, exactly how things will proceed. Exactly. And we hope for their benefit that it's something they can resolve quickly. But of course, the opposition, we should remember that the UK government isn't just about one party. There are the several opposition parties, and Keir Starmer, as opposition leader, unsurprisingly, immediately came out and called for a general election. How is that likely, given, as you mentioned, the huge majority that Boris Johnson got in 2019? But how would that be brought about? Could the opposition parties call for a vote of no confidence in the government at this stage?
They could, and the government would band together, the Parliamentary Conservative Party would band together, and that vote would be defeated. And in one sense, rightly so. We aren't a presidential democracy. Therefore, we don't elect a prime minister. We elect a party with the greatest majority of members. And so at an election, each constituent cast their vote for a member of parliament, their own individual member of parliament, who may belong to a party, and then the people with the biggest party, they will present a prime minister, who will then present themselves to the king, and that person will be the prime minister, the leader of the biggest party. So whoever has the biggest party, it's their job to find a prime minister, a first minister, who can command the authority of the House. So whoever the Conservative Party finds will be prime minister, and it's then their job to command the authority of the House. And so we could have another 20 prime ministers, I suppose, before we are forced into a general election. This cry for a general election is not going to happen, number one, because the Conservative Party is in tatters. And at the moment, I think Liz Truss's personal rating is on a par with President Putin's, and the Conservative Party's rating is absurdly low. It's lower, I think, than 1997, which brought in a landslide victory for Tony Blair. The last I heard was that if there were a Conservative Party, if there were a general election tomorrow, the Conservative Party would probably squeeze in with about 40 or 50 seats, and many of the current ministers would lose their seat. Yes. No Conservative Prime Minister is going to call an election under those terms. it would be the wipeout of the Conservative Party. I think Liz Truss it will probably be held responsible for the collapse of the Conservative Party. It will need to be repaired. That takes a lot of time in politics. I think whoever comes in as the new Prime Minister must prepare the party for a lengthy period in opposition, and it would be better if that was in the 120, 150 number of seats rather than in the 40 or 50, which might be the result if an election were called tomorrow.
And of course, just to put that in perspective, there's 40 or 50 out of 600 odd seats. So we're talking about 10. You're talking about around 10% of the House.
It would be absurd. Should an election be called today, it's likely that the SNP would become His Majesty's loyal opposition, which might do something to save the Union, but it would be absurd.
It's 16 hours.
I don't think the Conservative Party... I think the Conservative Party would find itself in a position where it was losing its deposit in elections around the country. And so all of this is the responsibility of Liz Truss and her former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng. And that extraordinary economic experiment, the arrogance of that experiment, I think will go down in the history books as something that potentially and possibly will wreck the Conservative Party itself. And what's important is our parliamentary system works on the balance of the two sides of Parliament. So yes. although it's important to have a good government, it's equally important to have a very sound and effective opposition. Absolutely. And the Labour Party in the last few years has not been that sound and effective, and that's possibly what has driven the Conservative Party into absurd ideology. We need to get back to a balanced Parliament, and how that happens now at this juncture, I really don't know. But we have looked over the precipice, and at the same time, I think Liz Truss has to be held responsible for this intense navel-gazing which has gone on for months and months, really. And she has perpetuated that at a time when there is a serious international crisis, and we are simply not stepping up to the post. I think this is not only politically wrong, it's immoral. And she should be deeply castigated, excoriated for that. She should lose her seat, not only her job.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting period to look back on in history, the 2022 as a whole, but particularly the events of the last 4 months or so with Boris Johnson's exit and this short period of tenure from Liz Truss. Tim, I'm sure that we'll be speaking about this as things progress, and we'll be finding out how the lettuce fared. I believe one media outlet was